Doreen Ebert was born on November 29, 1952, in California, and grew up in a very large family of 5 children. Doreen was a kind, positive person who always sought to help others. Since her school years, she decided to pursue a career that would allow her to help people. So after college, she moved to San Francisco and started working as a physiotherapist. Doreen also dreamed of creating her own big family, and soon the opportunity presented itself. At the age of 24, she met a man named Michael Dennis. He worked at a manufacturing plant near Doreen's clinic, and soon the couple began dating. A few months later, they decided to get married, and in 1976, their son, Paul, was born. Initially, Michael and Doreen were happy together, but after the birth of their child, their relationship started to deteriorate. Within a year, they decided to divorce. Their son stayed with his mother, and Michael could regularly visit him. Despite all this, they maintained a normal relationship. A year later, Doreen met a man named Charles. They began dating, got married, and decided to move to San Jose, settling in a quiet residential area. In 1979, their daughter Diana was born. Charles, like his wife, dreamed of having a big family. He raised her son and was overjoyed at the arrival of their daughter. However, tragedy struck the family in February 1980. 4-year-old Paul climbed over the fence around their pool and fell into the water. Doreen, who was at home at the time, noticed it too late. She pulled her son out of the water and called for an ambulance. They took the child to the hospital, and he was connected to a life support machine. But after 10 days, the doctors concluded that there was no chance of survival. The decision was made to disconnect him from the machine. Doreen was devastated and broken. She couldn't stop blaming herself, even though the police investigation showed it wasn't her fault. Nevertheless, the woman continued to live, and her little daughter helped her cope with this tragedy. For years after the tragic events, something good finally happened to the family. Doreen and Charles had been trying to have another child for a long time, but unfortunately, pregnancies had been interrupted twice. Eventually, Doreen became pregnant again, and this time, everything was going well. The couple was expecting the arrival of a boy who was scheduled to be born in early November. Just a few days before Doreen was supposed to go to the hospital, the family decided to participate in Halloween activities. It was the evening of October 31st. All the neighbors decorated their homes, handed out candy, and went trick-or-treating with their children in the neighborhood. Diana, who was 4 at the time, really wanted to join in, and her parents couldn't refuse. Despite Doreen being 9 months pregnant, she went trick-or-treating with her daughter, while Charles stayed home, handing out candy to other kids. The mother and daughter returned home shortly before 9 p.m. Charles informed his wife that they were running out of candy, and he planned to drive to the nearest store to refill their supplies, because he didn't want to leave kids without treats. He left the house around 8:50 p.m. and returned approximately 15 minutes later. Approaching the house, he noticed the front door was slightly ajar, which struck him as odd. However, what awaited him was a genuine nightmare. Upon entering, he discovered his wife lying in the corridor on the floor, surrounded by a substantial amount of blood. Doreen showed no signs of life, and Charles immediately called 911. Soon, he noticed that in the living room lay the body of their unborn child. The man was in a deep state of shock, unable to believe what he was witnessing. At some point, the thought crossed his mind that Doreen might have had a miscarriage, but he quickly realized it was much worse. Next to the child lay a human hand. Charles immediately understood it belonged to Doreen. Realizing that someone had attacked his family, he began searching for his daughter, fearing that something might have happened to her as well. There was so much blood on the floor that the man even slipped and fell while running through the house. Fortunately, the girl was alive. She was hiding behind the sofa in the living room. When the ambulance arrived, paramedics found a weak pulse in Doreen and rushed her to the hospital. Unfortunately, they couldn't save her, and she passed away in the ambulance. Her child also did not survive. Besides being removed from the woman's womb, the unknown assailant inflicted numerous blows on the baby. Medical experts examined Doreen's body and concluded that she had been struck numerous times with a long, sharp object resembling a sword or machete. Meanwhile, the police investigated the house, which resembled a scene from a horrific horror movie. Later, several officers sought psychological help, as even they couldn't cope with what they had witnessed. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, walls, and even the ceiling. Investigators examined the entire house but didn't find the perpetrator or any clues. Outside the house, police saw bloody footprints on the sidewalk. They stopped in the middle of the road, leading investigators to believe the killer had gotten into a car at that spot. Soon, officers discovered another clue. On the lawn in front of the house, there was a wolf mask covered in blood. They speculated that it might belong to the killer, as Charles stated they never owned such a mask. The evidence was sent to the laboratory, and police tried to talk to Diana. The girl was in complete shock, but she was the sole witness to what happened and potentially could help identify the assailant. Diana told them that shortly after her father left for the store, someone knocked on their door. Doreen went to answer and saw a man in a wolf mask holding a long blade. He told her, "I'm going to kill you now." After that, the woman screamed at her daughter to run out of the house, and the girl hid behind the sofa. Diana couldn't recall what happened next until the moment when her father found her. She also couldn't help the police identify the attacker, as he was wearing a wolf mask. Initially, investigators considered the victim's husband as a suspect. They found it suspicious how his trip to the store coincided with the arrival of the killer, as Doreen was attacked just minutes after her husband left home. When Charles returned, he stepped on blood multiple times, even falling and getting covered in it. Police didn't rule out the possibility that he might have done this intentionally to have an excuse for the blood on his clothes. However, detectives quickly found several inconsistencies in this theory. Firstly, Charles's shoes clearly didn't match those that left bloody footprints on the street. Secondly, the killer likely got into a car parked on the road in front of the house, but there were no blood traces found in Charles's vehicle, nor were there a different pair of shoes. Police went to the store Charles visited and spoke to the staff member. He confirmed that Charles did buy candy from him that evening, indicating he didn't have time to commit the murder. Surveillance footage from the store also supported this alibi, so detectives temporarily stopped considering him the prime suspect and asked Charles if he had anyone in mind who might wish harm to his family. And the man immediately pointed to Doreen's ex-husband, Michael. According to Charles, initially, Michael maintained a normal relationship with his ex-wife, but everything changed after the death of their son, who drowned in the pool. Michael blamed Doreen, believing she deliberately killed the boy to cut all connections with him. He even filed a civil lawsuit against her, seeking to hold her responsible for the child's death, but lost the case. Even during the time when Michael and Doreen were still married, he occasionally behaved quite strangely. After the birth of their son, he often fell into depression, distancing himself from both his wife and child. Doreen believed all of this was somehow connected to his childhood traumas. Michael had hearing problems from an early age, requiring him to constantly wear a bulky hearing aid. In those days, it was a rather large device, and because of it, other children constantly teased Michael. All of this led to the man growing up introverted, practically having no friends, and avoiding interaction with women. Despite seemingly leaving these issues behind after meeting Doreen, Michael couldn't shake off his old problems. This became one of the main reasons for the couple's decision to divorce. When Doreen married Charles, Michael began harboring resentment and animosity towards her, especially disliking the fact that another man was raising his son. These feelings intensified after Paul's death, and he started genuinely hating his ex-wife. Michael also lost his job where he had spent most of his adult life. This factor also had some negative effect on him. After hearing all of this, the detectives decided to go to the man's house and talk to him. Charles's account was clearly insufficient to make Michael the prime suspect, but since he lived only 2 miles from Doreen's house, they decided to pay him a visit right away. Officers arrived at his home around midnight and saw the pickup truck parked near the garage. They shined a flashlight inside and saw something resembling blood on the steering wheel and keys. Afterward, they knocked on the door, but nobody answered. The lights were on, and officers could hear water running inside the house, leading them to suspect that the man might be disposing of evidence or cleaning blood-stained clothes. So they continued knocking. Michael eventually opened the door. He remained calm, even after being informed about his ex-wife's murder. The man answered all their questions nonchalantly and allowed the officers inside without a warrant. According to him, he went to the store during the day, returned home, and hadn't left since. Michael even agreed to sign voluntary consent papers to allow a search of his house. As he reached for the pen to sign, investigators noticed a deep cut on his right hand. Michael claimed he accidentally cut himself earlier while carving a pumpkin for Halloween. However, the police doubted his words. The wound was visibly fresh, and blood was still oozing from it. Meanwhile, a few officers started searching his house. Michael went upstairs with one of them since they asked him to show his ID. When they entered his bedroom, Michael reached for the bed headboard, but the officer immediately told him to step aside. His actions seemed suspicious. Why would he keep his documents behind the bed? When the officer approached, he saw a holster hanging on the bed headboard with a loaded gun inside. He took the weapon and led Michael downstairs to the other officers. Meanwhile, his colleagues discovered blood droplets on the floor, leading them to a washing machine in the garage and a pile of clothes with bloodstains. This was sufficient for an arrest, and they took the man into custody. Afterward, detectives, along with forensic experts, scrutinized the house more thoroughly, seeking evidence that might link Michael to the murder. The analysis of the blood would take a few days, and meanwhile, the police found some new gruesome discoveries. At first, they uncovered an empty box for a machete with an 18-inch blade. Medical experts confirmed that this model perfectly matched the wounds on Doreen's body. Secondly, Michael had 2 makeshift coffins in his house, leading detectives to suspect they were intended for Doreen and her husband. Additionally, the police found body bags typically used by medical staff. Considering Michael had no association with these items, it raised significant concerns. Putting all these pieces together, the police went to the judge to request a warrant for the suspect's arrest for an extended period. Without it, they could only detain him for a limited time. However, the judge deemed the evidence too circumstantial. As a result, Michael had to be released, and the man walked free. Nevertheless, 3 days later, the detectives got the answer from the lab. Experts found 2 types of blood at the crime scene, belonging to different individuals. Blood type analysis revealed that the majority of it shared the same blood type as Doreen, with a small amount matching Michael's. Apparently, the man injured himself during the attack on his ex-wife. This time, the judge promptly issued an arrest warrant, and Michael was officially charged with the murder of his ex-wife and her unborn child. Soon, detectives found another piece of evidence linking him to the crime. Speaking with Michael's acquaintances, they learned he owned the exact same wolf mask found near Doreen's house. On the previous Halloween, he wore it to a party, and police even discovered a photo of Michael wearing the mask. To eliminate any doubts, they found in his home the exact clothing he wore in that photo. But the story of the mask didn't end there. To further strengthen the case, police interviewed all of Doreen's neighbors about that evening. It turned out that children going door to door for candy saw an adult man wearing a wolf mask standing across the street from the victim's house, staring at it. Notably, they spotted him around 7 p.m., 2 hours before the murder. Michael's trial began in July 1988, 4 years after the murder. Initially, he pleaded not guilty, but later changed his plea. He didn't deny committing the murder but claimed innocence due to mental health issues. A psychologist assigned to him concluded that he indeed had serious mental problems. Michael told him that he snapped because of Halloween. Witnessing other kids joyfully trick-or-treating reminded him of Paul's death, triggering his breakdown. According to Michael, he went to Doreen's house with a machete on that evening. When she opened the door, he said, "You killed my son," and added that he intended to murder her. She immediately recognized the man behind the mask, screamed for her daughter to run, and in the next second, Michael attacked her. He insisted that he was unaware of Doreen's pregnancy, a claim that seemed hard to believe. Standing at just 4 feet 11 inches tall, all her friends insisted it was impossible not to notice her pregnancy. Before the tragedy, they even joked that because of her belly, Doreen had become broader than taller. The prosecution argued that the man was fully aware of his actions and had planned the crime in advance. During the investigation, detectives discovered he had told friends about his desire to kill his ex-wife and her husband, then dispose of their bodies in the bay. Given that they found 2 coffins and body bags in his home, the prosecution suggested he intended to carry out this plan but changed his mind for some reason. Perhaps he panicked or feared staying in the house too long, thinking he might get caught. Doreen's daughter Diana also testified at the trial. At that time, she was 9 years old and still vividly remembered what happened. Charles didn't want his daughter to go through such a traumatic experience, but she was the only witness. The trial spanned a year, and in the end, the man was found guilty of murdering Doreen and her child. Michael was sentenced to death, but while he awaited execution, California imposed a moratorium on the death penalty. As a result, Michael remains behind bars to this day, and his sentence is unlikely to be carried out anytime soon. Many years later, Diana revealed that this murder haunted her throughout her life, never allowing her to forget that horror for a moment. Eventually, she decided to forgive Michael and try to leave it all in the past, fearing she might lose her sanity otherwise. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our new channel, where we uncover captivating and chilling cold cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss the twists and turns we have in store. Let's continue. Alex Cooper was a 65-year-old man living in Cranbrook, British Columbia. He had a wife named Margaret, and they had been married since 1952. Alex had 5 children and 7 grandchildren. He was a much-loved husband and family man who enjoyed nothing more than spending time with his family and making music. From 1974 to 1986, Alex worked in the cleaning industry. In 1986, he took a job as a salesman, which required him to spend time on the road, often keeping him away from his family for days at a time. On the morning of April 4th, 1987, Alex's daughter Lila and her husband Pete left Cranbrook for a shopping trip. As they drove past a bridge, they spotted Alex's car off the side of the road. They pulled over and walked down to the riverbank, assuming Alex might be fishing. However, when they reached the river, there was no sign of him. Lila grew concerned. Alex had a heart condition. She called her mother, Margaret, who revealed she hadn't seen Alex in over 24 hours. The family called several hospitals, but Alex hadn't checked into any of them. They then reported him missing to the police. Investigators found his car locked, with clothing and fishing equipment inside. An extensive air and land search began, but no trace of Alex was found. Authorities then tried to determine where Alex was last seen. They discovered he had eaten lunch at a restaurant less than a mile from where his car was abandoned. Margaret told investigators that Alex always carried a large roll of cash, leading her to believe someone may have robbed and killed him. Lila, however, thought he might have suffered a heart attack near the river, fallen in and drowned. Local newspapers and television stations covered Alex's disappearance, prompting witnesses to come forward. Some reported seeing a man matching Alex's description hitchhiking near where his car was found. This led investigators to suspect Alex may have wanted to disappear, but his family refused to believe it, insisting he was a devoted family man. It also didn't make sense for him to leave behind his heart medication and credit cards. A year after Alex vanished, Margaret searched for his birth certificate and made a shocking discovery. No such record existed. There was also no trace of Alex Cooper before their marriage in 1952, leaving the family in a state of confusion. Then, on May 27, 1991, another bombshell hit. David Cooper, a traveling salesman from Toronto, went missing halfway across the country. He had been living in a boarding house for about a year selling meat products door to door. When a friend reported him missing, investigators searched his room and found a photo of him holding his grandchild. Strikingly, David Cooper looked identical to Alex Cooper. Police showed the photo to Alex's family, who confirmed the 2 men were the same person. On May 29, 1991, Alex, now going by David, returned to his room after a business trip and noticed someone had been inside. His landlady admitted she had let investigators in. When police returned days later, Alex was already gone. Authorities and the Cooper family theorized that something in Alex's past had forced him to disappear. On September 25, 1991, his case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries. A viewer in Hamilton, Canada, recognized him and contacted police. Investigators located Alex, who finally confessed. His real name was Albin Arsenault. In 1948, at age 26, Albin had worked for the Union Pacific Railroad and was falsely accused of theft. Unwilling to face arrest for a crime he didn't commit, he changed his name to Alex Cooper and married Margaret 4 years later. By 65, he realized he couldn't claim a pension without proper documentation. Unable to confess his decades-long lie to his family, he chose to vanish instead. Winston Bright lived in New York with his wife, Leslie, and their children. He had worked for Verizon for 20 years. On October 12, 1990, Winston called Leslie from work around lunchtime, and everything seemed normal, but he never came home. Leslie searched for her husband for years, eventually giving up hope that he was still alive. Then, 2 decades later, a man named Kwame Seko arrived at Leslie's store, claiming to be Winston Bright. Leslie didn't believe him. Kwame went to court to legally establish his identity as Winston, but the case was dismissed due to lack of proof. It wasn't until 2018 that Kwame could definitively prove he was Winston. DNA tests matched him to his mother and children. Kwame claimed he had suffered amnesia and that his first memory was wandering the streets of San Diego with no idea who he was. He adopted the name Kwame Seko after seeing it in a newspaper, recalling only fragments of his past. In February 2008, he began working as a teacher. Later, he discovered his own missing persons case online and realized he was the subject. During a trip to New York, he recognized a former acquaintance from a Jehovah's Witnesses group he had once been part of. That person contacted Leslie. Though Leslie now accepts that Kwame is Winston, she doesn't believe his amnesia story. She believes Winston abandoned the family and started a new life. Sylvia May Guel lived in Cherry Hills Village, Colorado, in 1981. She worked as a personal assistant at an architecture firm and was also a talented baker who ran her own wedding cake business. Described as ambitious, vibrant, and friendly, Sylvia had a daily ritual of visiting her parents' house each morning for coffee. At 11 p.m. on August 3, 1981, Sylvia spoke to her sister on the phone, the last time anyone heard from her. The next morning, her father, William Quayle, arrived at her apartment and made a horrific discovery: Sylvia's lifeless body on the living room floor. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Broken fingernails showed she had fought desperately for her life. Investigators determined the attacker had tried multiple windows to break in and had cut the exterior phone line to prevent Sylvia from calling for help. 140 pieces of evidence were collected, including the killer's DNA. Soon after the murder, Otis Elwood Toole falsely confessed to the crime. Toole and his accomplice, Henry Lee Lucas, claimed responsibility for hundreds of killings, but only a few were ever verified. In 1995, the killer's DNA was uploaded to the Cody's database, but no matches were found. In 2019, investigators partnered with United Data Connect, a company specializing in genetic genealogy. By May 2020, their technicians identified a suspect, David Dwayne Anderson. At the time of the murder, the 22-year-old Anderson had lived just miles from Sylvia's home. Authorities tracked Anderson to Cozad, Nebraska, where he then resided. To confirm his identity, they covertly collected his DNA from 15 discarded items in his trash, including a vanilla Coke can, which provided a clear profile. On January 29, 2021, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation confirmed the DNA matched evidence from the crime scene. David was arrested at his Nebraska home and is currently held at the Dawson County Jail, awaiting trial. If convicted, he faces life in prison. Gail Barris was born in San Antonio, Texas, in 1958 but grew up in Battle Creek, Michigan, after moving there as a child. Though trained as a nursing assistant, by 1988 she was working 2 jobs at local bars in the Battle Creek area. Gail was last seen alive on October 9, 1988, leaving Speed's coffee shop on West Michigan Avenue in Battle Creek. Witnesses reported her arguing with a dark-haired man. After this encounter, she failed to show up for either job, behavior completely out of character for her, and her family couldn't reach her. Just over 2 weeks later, on October 25th, Gail's body was discovered in Emmett Township, Michigan, roughly 5 miles from where she was last seen. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed, leaving behind 3 children, ages 10, 12, and 13. Roger Plato, a 24-year-old local man, quickly became the prime suspect. He was already under investigation for a separate assault case. When police attempted to question him, a confrontation escalated, ending with officers fatally shooting Roger. His family maintained his innocence, insisting he was respectful toward women and incapable of such violence. Investigators interviewed Roger's friends but uncovered no further leads. With no progress, the case went cold for decades, until 2021, when a detective re-examined a DNA sample collected from Roger. Testing confirmed his DNA matched evidence from Gail's assault and murder. In a Facebook post about the breakthrough, Gail's son, James Paris, admitted he hadn't been the easiest person to deal with over the years regarding the investigation. He extended gratitude to Sergeant Marshall of the Michigan State Police for persevering. In February 2007, an unknown man in a gray Chevrolet pickup truck hit a man on a motorcycle in Midland, Texas, and left the scene without helping the man. There was nothing the paramedics could do. The man passed away due to his injuries. He was identified as 27-year-old Dustin Davidson. Investigators tried to identify the person who drove the Chevrolet pickup truck, but they were unable to. No one came forward with useful information, and the case went cold. It would stay that way until 2021. In February, the Midland Police Department received information that the man in the pickup truck was Raymond Dalklick. Investigators went to talk to him and he confessed. He said that he was too scared to come forward in February 2007. Raymond could face up to 20 years in prison. Midland Police Officer Kevin Haven said, "It is probably one of the most rewarding cases, one of the most rewarding calls I've been able to make." The parents expressed their gratitude first of all, and they said that they thought this was a case that would never get solved and they would never get answers to. Laura Hobbs was born on September 25, 1996, in Texas. Later, her parents had 3 sons, but soon after, the couple separated. Laura's mom moved with the children to the small town of Zion in Illinois. Laura loved this place. Her maternal grandparents lived there, and she quickly made new friends. Moreover, Zion was located on the shore of Lake Michigan, and she enjoyed going there with her relatives. In the February, when Laura was 8 years old, her father decided to reconcile with his wife and move back into the children's lives. He relocated from Texas to live with the family. On Sunday, May 8th, it was Mother's Day. Laura, along with her brothers and parents, went to the lake to celebrate the occasion and fly kites. They had a great time, and later Laura wanted to go for a walk with her best friend, 9-year-old Crystal. The girls attended the same school and lived close to each other. When Laura moved to Zion, they immediately became friends and spent almost all their free time together. They visited each other's homes, played near their houses, and rode bikes. Sometimes, when Laura's mom didn't allow her to go out, Crystal would come to her window and they would talk. On that day, they decided to take their bikes and go to the park, which was only a few hundred yards from their homes. They often went there since the park was very close and it had a long bike trail. Despite their age, parents weren't afraid to let their daughters go there because both girls knew the area well, and serious crimes in the town were extremely rare. The girls left around 3 p.m. and were supposed to be back for dinner. However, as time passed, their parents started worrying. When it was 7 p.m. and Laura and Crystal still hadn't returned, they decided to go to the park and call them home. To the surprise of the adults, the girls were not there. They walked along the bike path calling their names, but there was only silence in return. Other relatives and friends of the families quickly joined the search. They continued to search the park and also went through the streets of their neighborhood, hoping to find them. This went on for several hours until it started to get dark. By 9 p.m., the parents realized that something might have happened to their daughters, and they decided to contact the police. The police immediately joined the search efforts. They contacted volunteer organizations and enlisted the help of several dozen volunteers, as well as search dogs. In addition to this, local residents who heard about the girl's disappearance also joined the search. The police focused their efforts on the park area since the girls were supposed to go there. Speaking to other children living along the route from their homes to the park, the police learned that Laura and Crystal did indeed pass by them, stopped to chat, and mentioned that they were heading to the park. Parallel to the search, the police went door to door the hopes of finding anyone who had seen the girls that evening. They also began distributing flyers with information about their disappearance. As each hour passed, it became increasingly evident that something terrible had happened to the girls. Darkness had already fallen, and they were being searched for throughout the town, but there were simply no traces of Laura and Crystal. The search continued practically until dawn, and at around 4:30, the police decided to take a break. However, Laura's father and her grandfather refused to return home and continued scouring the area. They went to the park and decided to split up to cover more ground. Around 6 a.m., as the first light of day began to break, Laura's grandfather suddenly heard a cry and rushed in that direction. He stumbled upon Laura's father, who was in shock and claimed to have found the bodies of Laura and Crystal. They lay off the bike path amidst thick undergrowth. Laura's father immediately realized that both girls were dead, as there was a lot of blood and injuries on them. The man called the police, and they arrived promptly. After examining the bodies, forensic experts determined that the cause of the girls' deaths was multiple stab wounds, most likely from a knife. Laura had 20 such injuries on her body, while Crystal had 11. This news sent shock waves through the small town. Such crimes were almost unheard of there, but now they were faced with the horrifying reality that an unknown assailant had killed 2 young girls just a few hundred meters from their homes. The police focused all their efforts on finding the culprit. Their initial suspicion fell on Laura's father, Jerry. They were concerned by the fact that he had managed to find the bodies alone after the park had already been searched by officers and volunteers. Digging deeper, they discovered that Jerry had a significant criminal history, ranging from drug-related offenses in his youth to assaults on people. One incident in February 2001 had led to his wife and children moving to another state. On that day, while they still lived in Texas, Jerry and his wife had a heated argument that quickly escalated. They were in front of their home, and 3 men passing by noticed the situation and intervened, thinking the woman was in danger. Jerry became infuriated and went to get his chainsaw, then started chasing those men. Eventually, they managed to subdue him and hold him down until the police arrived. Jerry faced charges, and a year later, he was sentenced to 10 years of probation. As part of his probation, he was required to regularly check in with his probation officer, but he missed one of those appointments. Consequently, his probation was revoked, and he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. He was released from prison just a few weeks before the tragic deaths of his daughter and her friend, and he had come to Zion almost immediately after his release. For the police, it was clear that Jerry had a propensity for aggressive behavior. However, they had no evidence or motive, so they invited him for questioning. He agreed to go to the police station, and investigators gradually began to press him about his involvement. Over the course of more than 20 hours of questioning, Jerry initially denied any involvement in his daughter and her friend's deaths. He insisted he had nothing to do with it, and claimed that he and his wife noticed Laura hadn't returned. So he went searching. He said he continued searching until he found the girls' bodies in the park. However, later on, Jerry suddenly started changing his story. In the end, under the relentless pressure from detectives, he began to confess. He said that on that evening, he did indeed went looking for his daughter and saw her in the park with Crystal. He scolded her for going out without permission and demanded that she come with him. However, she refused, and he grabbed her arm, attempting to take her home. She resisted, and her friend Crystal also demanded that he leave the girl alone. According to Jerry, Crystal took out a small knife from her pocket and pointed it at him. This infuriated Jerry. He seized the knife and inflicted multiple stab wounds on both girls, then left their bodies in the overgrown part of the park and walked away. Later, by morning, he allegedly found the girls and reported it to the police to divert suspicion from himself. During this confession, Jerry was in tears, but he still signed his admission statement and repeated it on camera. The relatives of the girls were shocked by this turn of events. None of them could have imagined that Laura's own father would turn out to be the killer. However, his wife later told the police that she had always known about her husband's propensity for aggression, considering his previous prosecutor announced his intention to seek the death penalty. The preparation for the trial dragged on, and during this time some intriguing developments occurred in the case. Jerry was appointed a lawyer, and he suddenly claimed that he had no involvement in these murders. According to him, he confessed under immense pressure from detectives who had interrogated him for over 20 hours. He also alleged that they had threatened him and his family and subjected him to physical abuse. At that point, he had not slept for over 2 days and was in an extremely distraught state because he had found his daughter murdered and couldn't cope with the grief. The police began to tell him that if he simply confessed to the murders, they would release him and allow him to get some rest. They essentially formulated the most likely scenario of what had happened for him, and Jerry merely echoed their words. When the detectives pieced together a coherent narrative, they wrote down this confession for him to sign and asked him to read the text from the paper on camera. His attorney immediately requested a case review, but it was swiftly denied. The prosecution argued that Jerry had confessed voluntarily and affirmed his statement on camera. Nevertheless, after retracting his confession, he had to go through a full-fledged trial with a jury, which prolonged his wait for several years. Following this, Jerry's lawyer discovered some significant details. Initially, he knew that there wasn't a single real piece of evidence against his client and decided to focus on searching for any leads. Here, he found out that the medical examiners had not even thoroughly examined the bodies of the girls. They had conducted all the standard procedures like taking swabs, collecting debris from under the girls' fingernails, and so on. However, after storing these samples in the refrigerator, no one had considered analyzing their contents. The lawyer pushed to have all these pieces of evidence examined in an independent laboratory. The prosecution tried to obstruct his efforts, but he succeeded in his task. In February 2008, the examinations were finally conducted, and there was a rather unexpected twist. It turned out that Laura's body had several different DNA samples on it. There was foreign skin under her fingernails, and male semen found on her clothes and in 3 places on her body. Simple analysis revealed that none of this belonged to Laura's father. It all pointed to a completely different man. This discovery unequivocally indicated that Laura had been sexually assaulted. As for Crystal, they did not find any foreign DNA on her body, but no one doubted that she was killed by the same person. Jerry's lawyer immediately requested his client's release from prison and the dismissal of all charges. However, an unpleasant surprise awaited him here as well. The district prosecutor refused to acknowledge the new evidence, claiming that it meant nothing. In his opinion, the presence of foreign DNA on Laura's body could have been entirely coincidental. He argued that young couples regularly visited that park for intimate encounters, and he believed that this was why male semen ended up on the girl's body, possibly from the grass or bushes. Even the fact that some biological samples were found inside the victim's body didn't seem to faze him. Despite the absurdity of this version, Jerry remained in prison, awaiting the start of his trial. Nevertheless, the lawyer managed to get the DNA sample entered into the FBI's database, but there were no matches. All he could do was wait and hope that the perpetrator would be caught sooner or later, because there was no hope for reasonableness from the prosecution's side in Jerry's case. Let's fast forward 4 years and miles away from Zion. A 20-year-old woman named Amanda Snell, who had recently joined the military, lived in the military base in Arlington, Virginia. She decided to enlist because there were many military members in her family. Alongside her service, She occasionally helped a local church near the base. There, she taught children with autism and other developmental differences. Amanda quickly realized that she wanted to pursue this professionally and planned to get the necessary education after her military service. On July 13, 2009, she didn't report for duty, immediately raising concerns among her fellow service members. They went to a room, knocked on the door, but received no response. They discovered that the door was unlocked and entered. The room was impeccably tidy. The bed was made, and her belongings were neatly in place, but Amanda was nowhere to be found. Only after they opened the closet did they come across a horrifying sight. Amanda's lifeless body lay in an unnatural position with a pillowcase over her head. Initially, the medical examiners couldn't determine the cause of death, but they later concluded that Amanda died of suffocation. Her death had occurred over a day before her body was discovered. There were no signs of trauma on her body, and she had not been sexually assaulted. Investigators only found out that her laptop and tablet were missing from her room. When speaking with Amanda's parents, investigators learned an interesting fact. She suffered from severe headaches, and sometimes, when the pain became unbearable, she would retreat to a dark room and put a pillowcase over her head. Considering that Amanda was found in her own closet with a pillowcase over her head, detectives speculated that what happened might have been a dreadful accident. Nonetheless, they didn't rush to dismiss the murder theory. In front of her closet, they found a trace of a men's shoe, but they couldn't establish its ownership. Consequently, the investigation remained open, and investigators continued searching for a potential killer. In February 2010, a 26-year-old woman from Arlington exited the metro station and headed towards her boyfriend's home. In the middle of the street, an unknown man approached her, showed a gun, and demanded she get into his car. Despite the assailant grabbing her arm and brandishing a knife, the woman managed to break free. She threw her purse as a distraction and fled toward her boyfriend's house. Upon hearing her cries, he and his friends rushed onto the street and called the police. By the time they did, the assailant had already fled. Nevertheless, the woman could provide a detailed description of his appearance. She also remembered the model of his car, a beige Dodge Durango. Based on the victim's description, a composite sketch of the suspect was created, and the police began their search. 2 weeks later, on February 27th, two from Arlington were returning home after spending the evening with friends. When they stood at their doorstep, an unknown man approached from behind, brandishing a gun, and demanded their wallets. After the women informed him they had no money, the assailant forced them inside the house and bound their hands. At one point, he left the room, and one of the women managed to free her hands. She grabbed a phone and dialed 911. However, the man swiftly returned, snatched the phone, and smashed it against the wall. Subsequently, he grabbed one of the women, took her out to his car, and drove away. After covering some distance, he raped her, taped her head with duct tape, and strangled her with a scarf until she lost consciousness. She later regained consciousness in the snow by the side of the road when passers-by found her. She was taken to the hospital, where the police promptly arrived. The woman provided them with a description of the attacker and mentioned the model of his car, a beige Dodge Durango. Remarkably, just 2 hours before this attack, another woman had reported to the police. She told them that a man matching the same description and driving the same type of car had approached her on the street. He had attempted to coerce her into his vehicle, but she had used her stun gun on him and managed to escape. Investigators realized that they were dealing with a serial and highly dangerous criminal right in their midst. They focused their efforts on the vehicle, as it was easier to trace through databases. The police visited all owners of such cars, and soon they got lucky. During the inspection of one of these vehicles, they discovered a student ID belonging to the same woman who had been left to die in the snow, along with her earring. Inside the car, they also found the same type of tape used to bind her head and a stun gun. The owner of the car turned out to be a 21-year-old named Jorge Avila Torres, who was serving in the military at the very base where Amanda Snell's body had been found several months earlier. Moreover, he lived in the same building as her, just a few floors below. During the search of his room, investigators found a pistol he had purchased less than a month ago, along with numerous rounds of ammunition. On his computer, they discovered a significant amount of explicit videos depicting violence and cruelty. Some of these videos featured women who were unconscious. Photos of along with pictures of other men were shown to all three women who had been attacked. They all unanimously identified him. They remembered his face well because during the assaults, he didn't even attempt to conceal it. Following this, Torres was arrested and placed in custody pending trial. Investigators suspected him of kidnapping one woman and assaulting two others, which seemed likely given the evidence. However, they faced another problem when they began to suspect Torres of Amanda's murder. There wasn't a single piece of evidence linking him to the crime. So, detectives devised a clever plan. They planted an informant in his cell, someone willing to wear a wire and engage him in conversation. Surprisingly, this tactic worked remarkably fast. Within a week, Torres started confessing to his crimes. He openly boasted about killing Amanda, stating he did it just because the opportunity presented itself. He added that he did it for the adrenaline and provided a detailed account of how he placed her body in the closet. Torres also mentioned that after the murder, he had to meticulously clean her room to erase any traces. However, unknowingly, he left behind a piece of evidence during the cleanup. The criminal revealed to his cellmate that he had sexually assaulted the victim on her bed, using contraception. After moving her to the closet, Torres made her bed but removed the top sheet. However, he left the mattress pad, which the police immediately sent to the laboratory. Their experts found a tiny sample of male semen that matched Torres' DNA perfectly. Furthermore, Torres let slip to his informant that he had a pair of Nike sneakers that he kept in his car. Crime scene analysts seized the shoes and compared the sole pattern to the footprint found outside Amanda's closet. The sole pattern was an exact match. As a result, Torres was formally charged with murder, and he remained in custody awaiting trial. Meanwhile, a sample of his DNA had been uploaded database. Local investigators got a perfect match between Torres's DNA and the semen samples found on Laura Hobbs's body. What followed was even more astonishing. It turned out that Torres was originally from Zion and was friends with the older brother of the second murdered girl, Crystal. This connection confirmed that both Laura and Crystal knew Torres, a fact corroborated by other kids in the area. At the time of the girls' deaths, Torres was just 16, and the police hadn't considered him a suspect at all. They were solely focused on Laura's father, who had spent 5 years in jail awaiting trial. Once the DNA match was found, Jerry's attorney demanded his client's immediate release and the dropping of all charges. This time, the prosecutor couldn't argue against it, as the discovery of Torres's semen on Laura's body eliminated the possibility of her father's involvement. After his release, Jerry announced his intention to sue the police and authorities for coercing a false confession from him and making him spend 5 years of imprisonment. They quickly realized they had no chance of winning this case, and in the event of a loss, they'd be held accountable for their misconduct and incompetence. So they offered him a settlement which he accepted, receiving nearly $8 million. As for Torres, the legal process in Virginia concluded 4 years after his arrest. He refused to admit guilt, but the juror unanimously found him guilty. He was sentenced to death for Amanda's murder, and for the attempted abduction of 2 other women, and the kidnapping of a third, he received 5 life sentences, plus 168 years in prison. Immediately after this, he was extradited to Illinois, where the trial for the murders of Laura and Crystal began. Initially, he denied his guilt, and his lawyer tried to argue that the semen found on the victim wasn't enough to prove his client's guilt. However, Torres was eventually presented with a deal. He was already facing the death penalty, and even if that were delayed for decades, as it often happens, he would never walk free. So, the criminal agreed to confess to the murders in exchange for an additional 100 years in prison and a transfer to a different facility, as he felt his life was in danger at his current one. The terms of the deal didn't require him to reveal all the details. It was sufficient for him to admit to the killings. As a result, Torres remains behind bars, awaiting the execution that has yet to occur. As for the police officers who coerced Jerry into signing a false confession, none of them faced any consequences. Jerry himself couldn't fully return to a normal life. He began using drugs and was arrested for resisting arrest, subsequently escaping from custody and receiving a 2-year prison sentence. He also couldn't reunite with his family and chose to live in Texas. After his release, he gave an interview where he admitted that the coerced confession had irreparably damaged his life. When asked why he had agreed to the confession, he said, "I found my daughter dead. They didn't even need to try to break me. I was already broken." Finally, it's worth adding that the local police and the county prosecutor's office did receive well-deserved criticism from national media and the public. If they hadn't fixated on a single suspect, but conducted a thorough investigation, they would have had a much better chance of catching the criminal much earlier. Instead, they inadvertently allowed him to kill 1 woman and attack 3 more. And these are only the cases we know of. 59-year-old Virginia Hannon lived in Boston, Massachusetts in 1984. She used to be a lunch lady at a local elementary school, but retired when she was left some family inheritance. Virginia was also a widow and lived alone in her home. On February 12, 1984, someone broke into her house and took her life. Her body was found on her bed. The motive for what happened was not clear. Investigators were not able to find a person who did this to her, and the case went cold. In 2020, a man came forward with information that would finally help solve the case. He told investigators that he had a friend named Jesse Elwood. In 2019, Jesse told him that he took the life of Virginia Hannon. The reason he only told investigators in 2020 is because Jesse passed away just a day before at the age of 58. Investigators got a DNA sample from Jesse's body at a hospital where he had just passed away. In 2021, they learned that it matched the DNA found on several items that were at a crime scene. Jesse was never someone investigators looked into, but he did live close to Virginia and he does apparently have a criminal past. District Attorney Tim Cruz had this to say at a news conference: "No one in this room ever gave up on finding out who committed this heinous crime. Without a DNA, we would not know who did it." Most of Virginia's family members were on hand for the announcement, and they were thankful the day had finally come. It is still not known why Jesse did what he did, as nothing was taken, and it is not believed that he knew Virginia. Tim Cruz said, DNA gets us to the people, but it does not necessarily get us to what exactly happened. Virginia's nephew, Richard Hannon, said, "She was a great woman. She was very family-oriented and loved the area, loved the people around here, and was very generous." He still hopes that someone who knew Jesse would come forward with more information. Somebody will remember, I believe. Somebody will be brave enough to come forward. On September 18, 2001, a 7-year-old girl and her 8-year-old brother were walking to school in Greeley, Colorado. A man who was waiting near an alley got out and forced the little girl into his car. He then drove to a secluded area near the Greeley airport where he assaulted her. She managed to get away and went to the Air National Guard near the airport where police were called. The victim described the man as being light-skinned. She believed he might have been around 25 years old. He had a bad complexion and possibly a tattoo of a snake on one arm. He also spoke a little Spanish. Investigators tried to identify the man, but were unable to, and the case went cold for many years. In August of 2019, investigators contacted Parbar Nanolabs in Virginia to request the company's snapshot DNA phenotyping service. The snapshot produced an image showing what a subject potentially looked like. They can predict his ancestry, eye color, hair color, skin color, and face shape. This is what they came up with. Parbar Nanolabs also used genetic genealogy to help identify the man. Finally, in 2021, they identified a man as James Zamora. He was 26 years old at the time of the crime. This is a picture of what he looked like in February 2001. He passed away in 2012, so sadly there will not be any justice for the little girl. Investigators believe that James might be involved in more cold cases. They are asking anyone who knew him or had any interactions with him to please contact Detective Robert Cash at his number. On December 20th, 1976, 3 suitcases were found close to the Lehigh River in Whitehaven, Pennsylvania along Interstate 80. Inside the suitcases were the remains of a young woman. Investigators determined that she had been assaulted and strangled. Sadly, they also discovered that the woman was 9 months pregnant. Her unborn daughter did not make it. It is believed that the suitcases had been thrown out of a vehicle traveling west. 2 of the suitcases landed in the woods and the other one landed on the riverbank. It is likely that the perpetrator wanted to throw it in the river to lessen the chance of it being found. The young woman was given the name Beth Doe. She was roughly 5 feet tall and weighed 145 pounds due to her pregnancy. Beth Doe had dark brown hair, and it was believed that she was white and born in Europe before moving to the United States. Her fingerprints were taken, her teeth were examined, and missing persons reports throughout the United States and Canada were compared, but she still could not be identified. In February 2015, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released 2 reconstructions. In September 2019, the Pennsylvania State Police announced that Beth Doe could potentially be Madeline Cruz. Madeline Cruz ran away from her family in 1974. In 25, she called a friend asking for money because she was pregnant. Madeline would fit the timelines and description, but investigators found her alive and well. The renewed interest in the case, however, led police to use familial DNA of Beth Doe. They used DNA to locate some of her family members. On March 31, 2021, Beth Doe's identity was revealed as Evelyn Colon. She was 15 years old and of Puerto Rican origin. In 1976, she lived with 19-year-old Luis Sierra in Jersey City. One day, Evelyn contacted her mother asking for soup, but when she got there, Evelyn was gone. Luis sent her family a letter telling them that she had given birth to a child and not to worry. She would contact them if she needed anything. Evelyn's family never reported her missing as they believed she was safe with Luis and that she had cut contact deliberately. Also, on March 31, 2021, investigators went to Luis's home and questioned him. He at first claimed he had no idea who Evelyn Colon was, but later changed his story. Investigators felt they had enough to arrest him and did just that. He is currently being held without bail. 20-year-old Anna Marie Halavka was a resident of Portland, Oregon in 1979. She had an apartment that she lived in with her boyfriend and sister named Rose. Anna and Rose worked at a McDonald's close to the apartment. On July 24, 1979, Anna made her way home after work at around 5 p.m. Around 10 p.m., Rose came home and called Anna's name. When Anna did not answer, Rose went to Anna's bedroom. There she found Anna's lifeless body. She had been assaulted and strangled. Detectives collected forensic evidence from the crime scene. They also started looking for witnesses. A coworker saw her outside her apartment at 5 p.m., so they at least knew the crime took place between 5 and 10 p.m. Detectives also interviewed criminals who have committed similar crimes in the area. It unfortunately did not bring them any closer to solving the case. In February 2009, DNA was advanced enough to use the forensic evidence found in the crime scene to create a DNA profile of the person who took Anna's life. It was entered into the Cody's database, but no match could be made. In April 2018, investigators learned about a new technique that was used that could help them solve the case. Parabon Nanolabs was asked to help. They took the DNA the investigators had collected and tried to find relatives of the suspect on public DNA databases. In October 2018, they found a match, Jerry McFadden. McFadden was born in 1948 in Texas. On June 4, 1986, he kidnapped 19-year-old Brian Boone, 20-year-old Gina Turner, and 18-year-old Suzanne Harrison. He ended all of their lives. He was arrested just after this in July 1986, but he managed to escape. Only a few hours later, he was arrested again, after he was found in an abandoned house. In October 1999, 51-year-old McFadden was executed for his crimes. It is believed that he is responsible for a lot more crimes. Investigators learned that McFadden was in Oregon at the time Anna's life was taken. For Anna's family, the news is bittersweet. 21-year-old Leslie Marie Perloff lived in the Los Altos Hills, California. She was a Stanford University graduate, an aspiring law student. She lived with her widowed mom and worked as a clerk at a North County law library. Leslie was last seen at her job on February 13, 1973. When she did not arrive home, her mom Florence called the police. Leslie would always call if she would be late, so Florence immediately knew something was wrong. That same day, her 1972 orange Chevrolet Nova was discovered parked at a gate of an old quarry located near Old Page Mill Road. A few days after she was last seen, her body was found under an oak tree just west of where her car was found. She had been strangled. Investigators were able to retrieve DNA from the crime scene and was left behind by the person who took her life. Witnesses came forward claiming to have seen a blonde man near Leslie's car just before she went missing. After an extensive investigation, detectives were no closer to solving the case and it went cold. Then in July 2018, investigators learned about new advances in DNA that might help them solve the case after all these years. They submitted their DNA from the unknown male to a company. Some of you should be familiar with Parabon Nanolabs. They are a DNA technology company in Virginia. A DNA profile was then created, and using genetic genealogy, they were able to identify 74-year-old John Gurdrow was the person who took Leslie's life. He had previously served time in Germany for assaulting a 16-year-old girl in 1964. Investigators were also able to confirm that John took the life of Janet and Taylor using DNA in 2018. Janet's case is very similar to Leslie's. On the March 24, 1974, she visited her friends at Stanford University. That evening, 21-year-old Janet was seen walking along Junipero Serra Boulevard. The next morning, her body was found by a delivery driver. Her body had been dumped by a wooded area close to a bridge just off Sand Hill Road. Investigators always believed that what happened to Leslie and Janet were connected, but only proved it in 2018. John's trial was supposed to take place in 2020, but he fell ill and is now said to take place in 2021. It is believed that he could potentially be involved in more crimes, and investigators are currently looking into it. Leslie's sister Diane had this to say after hearing about the arrest. "I have been waiting for the skull for 45 years, and now that it came, I'm just a bit stunned. Not a day goes by that I do not think about Leslie in some way. She was my big sister, always looking out for me. She was and remains always with me." Tanya Nicole Cash was born on October 14, 1981 in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. She did not have a great childhood and her family struggled financially. She attended Cornell Middle School in 1996. There, the 14-year-old Tanya befriended the school security guard, Thomas Hose, who was more than twice as old as she was. He was very popular at a school and all the girls liked him. No other guy could compete with him. Thomas would often take her out of classes to talk to her. One day when he caught her skipping class, he kissed her. The two of them had started dating. Over time, Thomas convinced her to run away from her family and move in with him, which she did. Tanya would often run away, so it took a week before her family reported her missing. The police only looked for her for a few days before giving up. No one knew that she was staying at Thomas's house. He lived with his parents and his son. He went to great extremes to hide Tanya from his family. She was confined girlfriend and would be moving in with them. After this, girlfriend and would be moving in with him. After this, Tanya was allowed to occasionally leave the house, but she had a strict curfew. She soon realized that what she had with Thomas was not normal and decided that she had to get away. Tanya escaped on March 21, 2006 with the help of Joe Sparico, a grocery store owner in the neighborhood. She revealed who she really was to him, and he called the police to go to Thomas's house, where he was promptly arrested. Tanya was 24 years old at this point. Before his trial, Thomas was put under house arrest, which is kind of ironic considering that is where he kept Tanya as well. He also stabbed himself and was taken to a mental hospital. In February 2007, he pleaded guilty to the charges against him, and Anne was sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison. Tanya wrote a book about her experience called Memoir of a Milk, the Tanya Nicole Cash Story. Athena Strand was born on May 25, 2015 in the small American town of Duncan, Oklahoma. Her parents divorced and her father moved to Texas, while Athena remained living with her mother. Despite the distance, her father maintained regular contact and visited her whenever possible. Sometimes her mother also brought Athena to see him, as they got along well and she wanted her daughter to spend enough time with her dad later. Both her mother and father remarried. Athena was blessed with 2 younger sisters, and they shared a close bond, always trying to spend as much time together as possible. Athena was a typical happy child, always radiating positivity, loving to play and spending as much time as possible outdoors. In late 2022, when Athena was 7, she temporarily moved to live with her father in Texas until the New Year holidays, when she would return to her mother in Oklahoma. During this time, Athena attended a local elementary school. Her father's house was situated in a remote rural area, surrounded by woods and fields. She loved spending time in nature with her dad and had a good rapport with his new wife, Elizabeth. On November 30th, just like any other day, Athena returned home from school around 4:15 p.m. Her father and grandfather were out hunting, leaving Athena at home with Elizabeth. That evening, Athena wasn't in the mood, which led to an argument with Elizabeth. Eventually, Athena got upset and went to her room, while Elizabeth headed to the kitchen to prepare dinner. After about 20 minutes, she went to the girl's room to call her for dinner, but Athena was nowhere to be found. Elizabeth searched the entire house and even checked the yard, but the girl was nowhere in sight. Following that, Elizabeth called her husband's relatives, who lived just a few hundred yards away. Sometimes, Athena would visit them, but this time they said they hadn't seen her. After that, Elizabeth called her husband and told him what happened. He immediately told her to contact the police and headed straight home. At around 6:40, Elizabeth dialed 911, and officers arrived at her home within 14 minutes. She explained the situation and shared her version of what happened. She believed that Athena might have run away from home because of the argument they had. However, the girl's relatives strongly doubted this. Firstly, Athena was only 7 years old and had never wandered far from home before. Secondly, it was already evening outside, and she was afraid of the dark. Initially, the police treated Elizabeth with suspicion, mainly because she reported the child missing 40 minutes after she realized it. But after listening to her account of how she searched the entire house and contacted relatives, they concluded she was likely telling the truth. The officers immediately began searching the area. Despite the darkness, they combed the forests and fields within a radius of several kilometers from the house. According to their main theory, Athena could have left the house and gotten lost in the darkness, so they focused all their efforts on covering that area. They also considered the possibility of abduction, but found no evidence to support that. There were no signs of forced entry into the house. Elizabeth didn't hear any noises or screams, and none of the neighbors witnessed anything suspicious that evening. The police were assisted in the search efforts by the girl's relatives and concerned residents of the town. Athena's mother rushed there as soon as she learned about her daughter's disappearance. The search continued until almost 5 a.m., but they still couldn't find any traces of Athena. The situation was complicated by the fact that the area around the house was quite inaccessible, especially during the dark hours. At 7 a.m., the police resumed the search, involving even more officers. Additionally, when news of the girl's disappearance spread throughout the county, hundreds of volunteers joined the search efforts. Some of them scoured the area on horseback and ATVs, while the police utilized drones and helicopters with thermal cameras. Unfortunately, they still hadn't found Athena by the end of that day. The police were concerned for her life, as it was already the beginning of winter. Although Texas is a southern state, the temperature during those days dropped to 50 degrees. Given that the girl was wearing light clothing, it would have been really challenging for her to endure such weather. On the third day, the search continued and the police expanded the area to miles around the house. They also involved their colleagues, exploring the possibility of a criminal aspect to the case. Despite the initial lack of evidence of abduction, the police increasingly doubted that Athena had left the house of her own accord during these days. They combed several miles in all directions, but they couldn't find the girl. The idea that she could have walked such a distance without encountering any Civilization seemed highly doubtful. Investigators tried to identify everyone who was near Athena's house that evening. This task was quite challenging since the residence was surrounded by trees and located a few dozen yards away from the main road. Moreover, there wasn't a single surveillance camera in the area. Nevertheless, they quickly obtained their first lead. It turned out that on the same evening, a courier service had delivered a package to the girl's home. Investigators immediately contacted FedEx, where they were informed that the delivery to that address was handled by an external contractor. They reached out to the organization responsible for package deliveries, and they identified the specific van that had arrived at Athena's home that evening. Fortunately for the police, each of these vehicles was equipped with surveillance cameras, so they immediately requested the footage from November 30th. After rewinding to the time when the van arrived at the house, investigators saw very alarming footage. It showed the driver pulling a girl, resembling Athena, into the vehicle. They quickly identified the driver as a 31-year-old Tanner Horner, and the police went to his address. Soon, the man was arrested on suspicion of abduction, and he was taken in for questioning. As soon as investigators mentioned the video evidence, Horner began talking. He explained that on that evening, he had indeed delivered a package to Athena's house. When he was backing up his van, he felt a strike and went to check what had happened. Horner found the girl on the ground and realized that he accidentally hit her with his vehicle. Upon approaching, he noticed that she hadn't sustained any serious injuries. The girl was conscious, not crying, and even spoke to him. According to Horner, she told him her name was Athena. Feeling unsure of what to do in this situation, he panicked. After that, he put the girl in his van, trying to figure out how to resolve the situation. She continued talking to him and said that she will tell her father about it, and Horner became even more anxious. He didn't know what to do with the whole situation, as he understood that if the girl will tell adults about the incident, he could face legal trouble. And after that, he continued, telling the investigators something that, to put it mildly, puzzled them. According to Horner, he couldn't come up with anything better than to kill her. He said that he first tried to break her neck, but it didn't work. Then he strangled the victim, took her body to a river near a neighboring town, and dumped it in the water. Of course, such a version of events raised significant questions for the police, but the suspect provided them with the exact location where he left Athena. The investigators immediately went there and indeed found her body. The news of the girl's murder shocked not only her relatives, but also thousands of people across the country. By that time, all major media outlets were covering the case, and people were appalled by such cruelty. After the body was found, Horner was charged with abduction and murder. While waiting for the medical examiner's report, detectives scrutinized the criminal's identity, trying to better understand his motives. The version of events presented by Horner seemed utterly implausible. According to his account, he had lightly hit the girl with the van, causing her no serious injuries. However, the man was so terrified that he immediately decided to kill her. Considering that hitting a child without causing harm might only lead him to losing his job, Horner's story appeared highly strange. The police found that the man was engaged and had a child born a year before these events. Besides delivering packages, he occasionally worked as Uber driver. Horner was also involved in music and played in a band performing at various cafes in the neighboring city of Fort Worth. On social media, he posted multiple photos with his child, musical performance snapshots, and other things that, upon viewing, didn't portray Horner as a true monster. Before his arrest, he had no previous legal issues, and the police couldn't find any hints that this person was a cruel killer throughout his biography. Just 2 months before Athena's death, the man had posted photos of spending time with his son and his grandparents. The wait for the medical examiner's report, which was expected to shed light on the actual sequence of events, lasted for several weeks. In the meantime, Athena's parents filed a lawsuit against FedEx and the contracting company, accusing them of allowing Horner to work. They demanded higher standards for employee screening to prevent such crimes in the future. One fact that came to light made this whole story even more devastating. It turned out that the package Horner delivered that evening was a Christmas present for Athena. Her parents had ordered a Barbie doll, something she had long wanted. When the medical examiner's conclusion became public, even more questions arose in the case. According to the document, the victim died within the first hour after being abducted. Her body bore injuries of varying severity, and the cause of death was asphyxiation. However, the main version held by the detectives didn't stand. They believed that Horner noticed the girl near the house and decided to abduct her to sexually assault her, but the medical experts found no evidence of that. This puzzled the police as this motive seemed the most obvious. None of them believed that events unfolded according to the killer's account, as it lacked any logical explanation. Then the investigators speculated that the perpetrator initially planned to sexually assault the girl, but something deviated from his plan. According to the detective's version, after the argument between Athena and her father's wife, the girl went outside and was in the yard. At the same time, Horner arrived at the house to deliver the package and noticed the girl. According to this version, he saw an opportunity to fulfill his depraved fantasies. Athena was alone near the house, surrounded by trees, completely isolated from prying eyes. Horner could have either lured the girl into the van through deception or deliberately hit her to place her in the vehicle without resistance. What happened next is unclear. There are two main versions that seem most logical. Horner might have planned to take the girl far away from the house to commit his intended acts, but she either started screaming or attempted to escape. Fearing capture, the man killed her and then took her body to the river. According to the second version, Horner might have engaged in some deviant actions towards the victim that did not involve direct contact. In such a case, medical experts would not have found evidence of sexual assault. Soon, the detectives came across indirect and rather unexpected clue that this crime indeed could have had a sexual motive. Horner had no previous legal issues before this murder, which is relatively rare. In most cases, people capable of deliberately taking someone's life begin with much less severe crimes. For many weeks, the detectives meticulously studied Horner's past. They spoke to his relatives, friends, and acquaintances, trying to find any hints that the man might have been involved in other crimes. In the end, they made a breakthrough. The police managed to find several individuals who claimed to have suffered from Horner's actions when they were children. The police didn't disclose their identities in the interest of the investigation, nor did they reveal all the details of what happened. It's only known that one of the victims accused the man of assaulting her 9 years ago. Additionally, Horner was charged with 3 more incidents of sexual assault involving minors in 2013. It's unknown at this time whether these incidents involve one child or 3 different victims, but that's not all. One of Horner's victims had been publicly speaking for years about how he assaulted her when she was 16. She wrote about it on her social media, trying to bring attention to the fact that Horner was a dangerous criminal. For some reason, the man faced no consequences for this act and wasn't even considered a suspect. The girl accusing him of this crime wrote that for all those years, nobody believed her. However, after Horner killed Athena, these allegations received much more attention. They exposed the true nature of this individual and his possible motives. Now, Horner will also face separate trials for these 4 incidents. Apart from the legal proceedings for Athena's murder, there's one more aspect that, on its own, might not seem significant. But in the context of all of Horner's crimes, it provides further insight into his true character. After his identity became known to the public, internet users discovered his TikTok account. There were only a few videos, with the last one shot a few weeks before the murder. In this video, Horner recorded his reaction to a clip where someone captured a bug in a glass and then slowly poisoned it with a spray. Watching the bug die, Horner's face displayed a rather eerie expression, as if he genuinely enjoyed the process of killing. If the man was indeed a sadist who derived genuine pleasure from witnessing someone's death, his account of Athena's murder comes into question. Once again, Horner claimed that the only reason he killed her was the fear of facing punishment for a much lesser crime, but if we consider that he had such sadistic tendencies, his account appears even more absurd. As part of the preparation for the trial, the authorities announced that they would seek the death penalty. Horner himself hired a lawyer who advised him to withdraw his confession and declare his innocence, but this is unlikely to help him avoid punishment. Considering that the police have video footage from the van, as well as Horner's testimony about the exact location of the body, his guilt is more than evident. Moreover, additional evidence might be presented during the trial, the existence of which is currently unknown. Most likely, they found Athena's DNA traces in the van, and genetic material from the killer could have been collected from her clothing and body. We can only follow the course of the trial and wait for further details to become known to the public. Until then, feel free to share your opinion on this story in the comments. Irene Garza was born in 1934 in McAllen. It is a city in Hidalgo County, Texas. She graduated from McAllen High School. In 1960, she worked as a teacher at an elementary school in McAllen. Irene expressed fulfillment in her work. She was also very religious and attended a Sacred Heart church. On April 16, 1960, Irene told her parents as she was going to confession at the church. After midnight, she still was not home and her parents got worried, so they report her missing. 2 days later, on April 18th, Irene's handbag and left shoe were found on the road. A woman called Irene's parents claiming to be Irene and said that she had been kidnapped. The call was found to be false-saver. A man started telling people that he took the life of Irene, but that was just an awful joke made by the man after he had been drinking heavily. On April 21st, 1960, 5 days after she was last seen, her body was found in a canal in an area several miles away. Irene had been assaulted and suffocated. Any DNA evidence that could have possibly been left behind by the attacker was washed away by the time her body spent in the water. Law enforcement questioned about 500 people across several Texas cities. This included known offenders, Irene's family members, and her ex-boyfriends. The priest who heard Irene's last confession, John Fite, soon came under suspicion. Church members said that a confession line moved very slowly on the night that Irene was last seen, and that the priest spent a very long time with her. It was also noted that John had scratches on his hands. When questioned, John denied seeing Irene that night, but later admitted to having done so. A few days after Irene's body was found, the canal was drained. Their investigators found a camera belonging to John Fide. In February 2002, 2 acquaintances of John, Dale Tackney and Joseph O'Brien, came forward to police to say that John confessed to them that he took Irene's life. Investigators believed that John was responsible for what happened to Irene, but they did not feel they had enough for a conviction. In 2016, a new district attorney took office in Hidalgo County, and a case was let into again. In February 2016, John Fite was arrested in Arizona in connection of the Irene case. He was then extradited to Texas. His trial began in November 2017. In December, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. John passed away due to natural causes in 2020 at the age of 87. Just before 8 a.m. on March 19, 1993, the police received a 911 call from a 6-year-old boy who had found his mom's body in their apartment in Toronto, Canada. Emergency services were dispatched to the building, but 41-year-old Barbara Brodkin was already gone. She had a stab wound to the chest. A lot of cash were taken, so investigators believed that the motive was robbery. Investigators looked for witnesses, examined evidence, and interviewed over 100 people. The attacker could not be identified and a case went cold. In August 2017, the case was reopened. Evidence that was collected at a crime scene were sent in for DNA examinations. This led investigators to a man by the name of Charles Mustard, and they arrested him. Detective Stacy Gallant said that Charles and Barbara was acquainted but did not elaborate. Investigators believe this case is solved, and they are not looking for any other suspects in the case. They are ever asking anyone with more information to come forward. The body of a white female between 17 and 25 years old was found on October 29, 2006 in Kilgore, Texas. A total of $40 was found in her pockets. It is believed that she passed away between 8:15 p.m. and 10 p.m. the previous day. The unknown female was given the nickname of Lavender Doe, most likely due to purple sweater she had on. Detectives were able to recover a DNA sample belonging to an unknown man from her body. A lot of residents started pointing out suspicious people that they believed could be involved, and investigations started. In January 2014, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released a digital composite sketch. This led to the mother of missing 23-year-old Brandy Wells to come forward. Brandy disappeared after going out to a nightclub in Longview, Texas in August 2006. After DNA testing, it was found that Lavender Doe was not Brandy Wells. In August of 2018, a man by the name of Joseph Wayne Burnett confessed to the police that he ended Lavender Doe's life. He was originally questioned back in February 2007 because he lived in the area and was convicted of a similar crime. Also in 2018, the DNA Doe Project decided to try and find out the real identity of Lavender Doe. They analyzed their DNA profile and found her cousin who also lived in Texas. On February 11, 2019, they announced that Lavender Doe's real identity is Dana Dodd. Dana's mother abandoned her when she was a baby and her father was homeless. In February, she left the rest of her family behind in Florida and she moved to Texas. There she joined a door-to-door magazine sales team. It is believed that she met Joseph Wayne Burnett while working. 21-year-old Diana Bowden lived in Maricopa County, Arizona in 1978. She attended Arizona State University. On the evening of January 7, 1978, Diana had dinner at her parents' house. Afterwards, she went to a local bar with one of her friends. She stayed until just after midnight. On her way home, she went to a store to buy some milk. Sometime before 2 a.m., Diana made it home. Around 2 a.m., Diana's boyfriend unlocked her door to let himself into her apartment. He discovered Diana lying on her bed with a belt around her neck. She was covered in stab wounds. He sliced off the belt, called the police, and started CPR. It was too late, however, and she was already gone. Investigators found that her attacker also assaulted her. He had left his DNA on her body. Investigators tested this DNA sample against the DNA of Diana's boyfriend, but it was not a match and he was ruled out as a suspect. It would take over 20 years for this case to be solved. In February 2001, Detective Tom McKesney decided to have Diana's clothing retested for DNA. This gave them a better DNA profile of the suspect. It was also in February 2001 that the FBI was busy compiling the CODIS database, which gave Tom access to a national database of DNA from criminals. He entered the DNA into the CODIS database and there was a match: 52-year-old gas station attendant, Clarence Wayne Dixon. He was already in prison. In 1985, he was on parole and attacked a woman with a knife. That summer, he assaulted a female jogger. It is believed that he assaulted at least 10 women. His trial for the Diana case began in November 2007 and he was convicted. In 1966, 19-year-old Susan Galvin moved from Spokane, Washington to Seattle. She started working as an administrative employee at a Seattle police department. On July 13, 1967, Susan's body was found in the elevator at Seattle Center. She had been assaulted and strangled. For more than 50 years, investigators tried to find a suspect in the unsolved case to no avail. Then in 2018, investigators decided to make use of genetic genealogy to help solve the case. The used DNA collected at a crime scene had belonged to an unknown male and entered it into the JETMatch database. This led investigators to Frank E. Whippage. He was 26 years old at the time of the crime and lived in a Seattle area. Unfortunately, there will not be any justice for Susan or her family as Frank passed away in 1987. Susan was the oldest of 8 children. Her brother Larry Galvin made a statement after hearing that Frank was the person who took his sister's life. The loss was felt mostly by our mother, who did her best to keep us near her. It would be hard for her to lose another child. For her, the question was not necessarily who, but why. We children were young and resilient. We found our own ways to cope. As the years passed, we scattered to the winds. In 1977, Jane Morton Antones lived in Atascadero, California. She had recently divorced her husband. Her daughter went to live with him in Oregon, while Jane went to live with her parents. On the evening of November 17, 1977, Jane left her family's home to visit some of her friends. She never made it to her destination ever. The next day, her brother David noticed as she did not come home and he went to look for her. David made a terrifying discovery. He found a family vehicle along a road just about a mile from their home. Inside was his sister's body in a back seat. She had a wound to her neck. This was not the first tremendous loss for Jane's family. In 1965, Jane's sister had a fatal car crash. The only lead investigators got was a witness who claimed to have seen Jane pick up a man in her vehicle. Investigators also look at a man by the name of Rudy Martinez. He had been released on parole in Atascadero after his served time in prison for assaulting a woman. Martinez was a strong suspect, but investigators did not have concrete evidence that he was involved and the case went cold. In 2017, a cold case unit detective examined the case once again. He used evidence to create a familial DNA search. It soon came apparent that Martinez's DNA matched DNA found at a crime scene. There was a problem, however, for investigators. By this time, Martinez was no longer alive and they needed his DNA to confirm that he took Jane's life. Investigators managed to track down an ex-girlfriend of his. She had a razor that belonged to him. DNA belonging to Martinez was then taken from the razor. It was then finally confirmed that Martinez was the one that took Jane Anthony's life. Michaela Jurek was born on January 24, 1979, in Oakland, California. She was the first long-awaited child her parents had been hoping for after 5 years of trying. Later, Michaela's parents had 2 more children, and they all moved to a quieter town called Hayward. It was a peaceful place for their growing family. Michaela was a typical, cheerful child who enjoyed playing with her siblings and spending time with her best friend Katrina. These girls practically lived across from each other, so they were constantly visiting and playing near their homes. On November 19, 1988, when Michaela was 9 years old, she and Katrina were running back and forth between their houses, trying on different outfits for a school. It was a joyful day as it marked the start of Thanksgiving break. Around 10 in the morning, Katrina's dad gave her $5 to buy some candy. The excited girls rushed to Michaela's house to ask her mom if they could go to the nearby store, which was less than a mile away. Michaela's mom had doubts about letting them go because both girls were only 9 years old and they had never been to the store alone before. Although they had been there many times, it was always with family or older neighbor girls. After some arguing, Michaela's mom agreed with the condition that they would buy candy and head straight home. She was particularly concerned about Michaela's safety since she was their long-awaited first child, a true miracle to her parents. That day, Michaela's mom believed that nothing bad would happen. The store was just a short distance away, and the girls planned to ride their scooters there. Michaela ran back to Katrina's house. They intended to use 2 identical scooters, so Katrina took hers and borrowed one from her brother. They went to the store, left their scooters nearby, and went inside to make their purchases. When they came out, they got caught up in conversation and completely forgot about their scooters. They started walking home, but quickly realized their mistake and went back to where they had left the scooters. That's when they noticed that Michaela's scooter was missing. Thinking that someone had moved it, the girls decided to go around the store from different sides to find it. Michaela walked along the parking lot and soon spotted her scooter next to a car parked a few yards away from the store. She headed toward it, but suddenly, Katrina heard a terrifying scream. She ran back and saw a man grabbing Michaela and forcing her inside the car, right next to her scooter. The man swiftly returned to the driver's seat and sped away. Shocked, Katrina rushed back into the store and alerted the cashier about what had just occurred. The cashier immediately called the police, who arrived at the scene within minutes. The store employee also called Michaela's father, as they were acquainted, and informed him of the situation. Michaela's father, accompanied by Katrina's father, rushed to the store, where investigators were already present. The man told his wife to stay at home by the phone in case the police called. The detectives faced several challenges immediately. There were no surveillance cameras near the store, and the only witness to the abduction was Katrina, who was in deep shock and could barely speak. Her father was allowed to take her home. The store cashier provided the first lead. She mentioned that a suspicious man had been loitering around the store shortly before the abduction. He had parked his car, got out, but never entered the store. Instead, he walked along the building, peering through windows and seemingly watching the girls. The cashier had a gut feeling that he might be planning to rob her. According to her description, the man was white, around 30 years old, and had a prominent mustache. He had arrived in an old maroon-colored sedan, but the model and license plate number were unclear. After gathering description of the kidnapper, the police created a composite sketch and shared it with the media. News of the abduction quickly spread throughout the city and even beyond, leaving people shocked that such a brazen act could occur right near a busy part of town. They also disseminated the sketch and a description of the suspect's car to hundreds of patrol officers across the county. Officers began pulling over any vehicles matching the description in the hopes of finding the girl alive. Meanwhile, the detectives handed over Michaela's scooter to forensic experts for examination. They believed that the kidnapper had seen Michaela and Katrina arriving at the store and deliberately move one of the scooters near the back door of his car to facilitate the abduction. Deliberately move one of the scooters near the back door of his car to facilitate the abduction. This led them to think that his fingerprints might be on the scooter. And indeed, they found a fingerprint that didn't belong to anyone in Katrina's family or the 9-year-old girl. However, there was a challenge. The fingerprint was partial, making it difficult to conduct a database search. In those days, the technology wasn't advanced enough for such procedures, so the police had to rely on direct comparisons with potential suspects. By the evening of the abduction day, the FBI had joined the case, as there had been a rise in child disappearances not only in Hayward, but also in nearby cities. They suspected a possible connection between Michaela's case and these other disappearances. Despite the involvement of the FBI and extensive media coverage, there was little progress in locating the missing girl. Michaela's parents were understandably devastated. Her mother blamed herself for what had happened and recalled an unsettling incident that occurred just a week before the abduction. Michaela had woken up unusually early one morning, sat at the kitchen table, and claimed she was writing a poem. This was odd because she wasn't known for waking up so early. She mentioned that she had been awakened by a noise in the attic and was inspired to write a poem about people being abducted and kept in attics, not killed. At the time, her mother found it strange for a 9-year-old to express such ideas. But after the abduction, it took on an eerie and almost mystical significance. She couldn't help but wonder if Michaela had unknowingly predicted her own fate. In the 2 days following the abduction, the police put in exhaustive efforts to search for the suspect and the missing girl. However, they faced numerous challenges, and despite their best efforts, they were no closer to finding Michaela. They decided to revisit Katrina, hoping she might provide more information now that some time had passed. Here, the investigators encountered a perplexing turn of events. The girl who had witnessed the abduction and the cashier provided entirely different descriptions of the kidnapper's appearance. According to her account, the man appeared to be around 20 years old, with long unkempt light-colored hair that reached his shoulders and a face covered in pimples. She also noted his blue eyes, which reminded her of a fox's eyes. Katrina also recollected some details about the car. It was a beige sedan with a boxy shape and numerous dents. The police quickly realized that the cashier had given them a description of a completely different person. Her suspicion had arisen from the suspicious behavior of a man near the store. But Katrina, who had genuinely seen the abductor, described an entirely different man and vehicle. This presented a significant challenge for the investigators. They had disseminated an inaccurate composite sketch of the suspect through the media and to patrol officers, leading everyone to search for an entirely different individual. All of this unfolded within the crucial first 48 hours following the abduction, the most critical period for a swift resolution. Based on the girl's description, they promptly created a new composite sketch and redistributed it. Additionally, the police decided to interview all men in the area with prior convictions for sexual offenses. Numerous volunteers also joined the efforts, going door to door to interview residents in the hopes of someone recognizing the abductor or providing any other relevant information. They posted thousands of flyers and first intriguing lead. 3 individuals contacted them, reporting a hiking trip in a vast national park near their city. During their excursion, experienced hikers came across footprints on the ground, noticing one set belonging to an adult and the other to a child. They decided to follow these tracks, eventually stumbling upon a blanket and empty fast food wrappers in the heart of the forest. The police considered the possibility that these tracks might be connected to Michaela and her abductor. The psychological profile developed by FBI experts also suggested that the abductor would likely take his victim to a location as far removed from civilization as possible. Given the park size and its proximity to the city, it seemed to align perfectly with this theory. Detectives decided to search the park, utilizing all available resources. They combed the ground while helicopters with thermal imaging scanned the area from the air. However, all their efforts yielded no results. They couldn't find the girl or any evidence. The police continued to search other parks, mountains, and remote locations, but all led to dead ends. In parallel, they received a staggering number of tips. Because the case received around 4,000 tips, investigators struggled to follow up on each one, which proved to be highly challenging. This case was widely discussed among the residents of neighboring San Francisco and nearby cities. Even well-known figures made appeals to the public, urging people to share any information with the police. Soon, a substantial reward of $70,000 was offered, and Michaela's photograph appeared on millions of milk boxes throughout the state. Despite such widespread community involvement and an abundance of leads, detectives couldn't make any progress. By the December, a month and a half into the search, the police conceded that the only progress made was checking thousands of leads. Since then, there was no progress for many months. Police continued to receive numerous tips and diligently investigated each one. Even Michaela's mother conducted her own investigation, studying similar cases and trying to figure out who might have abducted her daughter. They all held on to hope that the girl was still alive, and the perpetrator was somewhere keeping her captive. In 1991, detectives turned their attention to a 43-year-old man named Timothy Binder, and the more they delved into his background, the more unsettling it became. Binder had already come under police scrutiny prior to Michaela's abduction due to his peculiar behavior. He had been sending gifts, letters, and money to numerous young girls. Some of these letters contained Bible passages with phrases like "I have chosen you and be with me" highlighted. Concerned parents of some of these girls reported him to the police, leading to an interrogation of Binder. He claimed he was merely trying to befriend these girls, thinking they were lonely. However, the investigation revealed a troubling history. In 1985, Binder had been fired from his job in Child Protective Services in Colorado for collecting personal information about young girls. Later, he sent gifts, money, and letters to them. During a search of his van, authorities discovered many photographs of children and Bible passages adorning the interior. Additionally, Binder had a prior arrest for attempting to lure 2 girls into his van, although no charges had been filed. What's more weird, Binder frequently visited the graves of young girls in local cemeteries, spending an unusual amount of time there. However, the situation took an even darker turn. 6 months before Michaela's abduction, a 7-year-old girl named Amber disappeared in the vicinity. Shortly thereafter, Binder reached out to the girl's mother, offering assistance and regularly visiting her home. He even wrote a letter to the police, suggesting that the next missing girl would be 9 years old. Several months later, Michaela, also 9 years old, was abducted. After her disappearance, Binder made numerous calls to her mother, visited her home, and offered his help. But the unsettling pattern didn't end there. In early December 1988, Binder sent a Christmas card to an FBI profiler he had previously spoken to. The card featured an illustration of a girl holding up 4 fingers. Shortly afterward, a 4-year-old girl went missing in the same town. Despite these disturbing circumstances, which constituted circumstantial evidence, detectives obtained a search warrant for Binder's home, where he lived with his wife. Unfortunately, they couldn't find any concrete leads linking him to any of the abductions. When news about Binder's odd behavior reached the newspapers, people began to suspect he might be a serial killer. This led to harassment and attacks on him and his family, and he eventually sued the city authorities for spreading misinformation, winning the case. Detectives continued to investigate him for several months, but ultimately concluded that there was no concrete evidence tying him to these crimes. Some detectives believed that he'd concrete evidence tying him to these crimes. Some detectives believed that he posed no threat to children, and his peculiar behavior might not have been connected to these cases. Consequently, the police redirected their focus towards other potential suspects. A new substantial lead didn't emerge until December 1992, 4 years after Michaela's disappearance. An inmate from Indiana, serving time for robbery, contacted the police claiming to know the identity of the girl's abductor. He stated that he had helped bury her body in the same park where traces had been discovered. Initially, investigators showed little interest in this tip, but the inmate wrote a letter to a prominent San Francisco newspaper. When his story became public, the police faced harsh criticism, and under public pressure, they decided to interview the inmate. He promised not only to pinpoint Michaela's burial site, but also to lead them directly to the murderer. He was transferred to California, and alongside the police, he embarked on a search mission. According to him, the body had been buried in a gladiolus field, and officers focused all their efforts on that area. The search continued for 8 hours until the inmate suddenly admitted that he simply made up the story. He explained that he had wanted to provide some comfort to Michaela's family and help them move forward. Instead, Michaela's relatives and the police were furious. For this false statement, the inmate was sentenced to an additional 6.5 years in prison, nearly doubling his overall sentence. He was ordered to pay Michaela's family compensation of $6,000. In August 2000, a new suspect emerged in the case. Police arrested a man named Curtis Anderson, suspecting him of a murder that happened a year earlier in Vallejo, involving a 7-year-old girl. He confessed to the crime and went to prison, but detectives had suspicions that he might have been responsible for other similar crimes. For 7 years, there was no concrete evidence to support this theory until Curtis contacted the FBI. He was in poor health and wanted to confess to additional crimes before his death. According to his confession, he had killed 13 more girls and women, including the 7-year-old Amber, who had disappeared 6 months before Michaela. He provided specific details that made investigators consider his involvement seriously. However, proving his guilt remained challenging because there was no physical evidence, and they couldn't locate the victims' bodies. Talking about Michaela's case, Curtis denied any involvement, despite the similarity of his car to Katrina's description. FBI agents planned to continue questioning him, but Curtis passed away. In 2012, another potential suspect came forward. An inmate contacted the police, claiming that his associate, Lauren Herzog, bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketch of the Michaela case suspect. Detectives were intrigued because Lauren and his partner had been convicted of murders they committed together. They were suspected of 19 people, but investigators could only prove some of those crimes. A month before his associate approached the police, Lauren had taken his own life in prison. Nonetheless, the police decided to investigate his potential involvement. A photo of Lauren in his younger days did resemble the composite sketch, but detectives needed more evidence. They chose to excavate a well where Lauren and his partner had disposed of their victims' bodies. They found thousands of bone fragments, which were then examined by medical experts. After extensive analysis, it was determined that the bones belonged to 5 different girls, but none of them matched Michaela's DNA. Despite examining several wells, the police couldn't find any evidence linking Lauren to the case. In 2018, there was a significant development in the case. A man named David Mitch was charged with the murders of 2 women in 1986 near Michaela's town. The key breakthrough here was modern DNA analysis. Back then, they couldn't analyze the biological material found under the victim's nails, but with advancements in technology, they linked David to these crimes. David was already in prison for killing his 39-year-old girlfriend in 1989. Detectives decided to investigate his possible involvement in Michaela's case and found some intriguing connections. They discovered that David was in the same area when Michaela was abducted. He also matched Katrina's description and had a similar car. Since David's fingerprints were already on record, experts reevaluated the partial fingerprint found on Michaela's scooter. Thanks to modern technology, they made a significant breakthrough. The fingerprint on the scooter was a perfect match to David's. In 2020, David was charged with Michaela's murder as the hope of her being alive had faded. He denied his involvement, and the case went to trial. In early 2023, preliminary hearings took place, and the judge ruled that there was enough evidence to proceed with the trial. David's lawyer attempted to challenge the evidence, arguing that the scooter's fingerprint didn't necessarily link his client to the murder. However, in this specific situation, it seemed a dubious claim as it was evident that the abductor deliberately left the scooter next to his car's back door to seize the girl when she approached. The defense also tried to challenge the murder charges since Michaela's body was never found, suggesting no proof of her death. However, this argument was not valid in modern times, as numerous cases have resulted in convictions without the recovery of the victims' bodies, given the substantial evidence. Moreover, David had a history of crimes throughout his life. At 16, he broke into a house and assaulted a woman at knife point. After serving a year in prison, he was released early and soon attempted another assault on a different woman. After another 2 years in prison, he was released again. In May 1988, 7 months before Michaela's abduction, David was arrested for a store robbery. He was sentenced to a year in prison, but was released a month before Michaela's disappearance. Michaela's father traveled from another state to attend the press conference announcing the arrest of his daughter's kidnapper. Unfortunately, Michaela's mother, who had hoped to find her daughter alive all those years, couldn't attend as she was battling cancer. Shortly after the news of the arrest, she passed away, thanking investigators for uncovering the truth before her life's end. Police pledged to continue searching for Michaela's remains and offered a $10,000 reward for any valuable information. David Mitch's trial is set to begin soon and will involve 3 cases, Michaela's and the 2 cases where his DNA was found under the victim's nails. Initially, the prosecution sought the death penalty, but the district attorney changed, and the new one made the decision not to pursue it. If David is found guilty of all 3 murders, he won't receive a life sentence, only several decades in prison. This decision caused outrage among the victims' families and sparked media attention, with David's lawyer being the only supporter of this change. However, David is already 62 years old, and there's not much chance he'll live to see the end of even this reduced sentence. It's worth noting that the correctional system, which repeatedly released him early from prison despite his history of crimes, unwittingly allowed him to commit Michaela's murder. Had he not been released just a month before the incident, the girl might still be alive today. In May 1998, the body of an Asian female was found on a side of the road in Spartanburg, South Carolina. She passed away due to suffocation. On September 25th of the same year, a landscaping crew cutting grass under a billboard along Industrial Drive in Mebane, North Carolina, found the remains of a young boy. It was believed that he had a light brown complexion and could potentially be Hispanic. Sketches of the woman and the boy were made to try and identify them to no avail. In October 2018, DNA technology was more advanced and it was realized that a boy had 1 white parent and 1 Asian parent. In December 2018, Dr. Barbara Ray Venter, who is known for her work in DNA, took a look at a boy's case. She was able to match his DNA to one of his family members who submitted their information into the JetMatch database. The boy was then identified as Bobby Adam Witt. His family did not report him missing because they believed that he and his mom went to live in South Korea. Investigators strongly believed that his mom could have been the woman whose body they also found. After DNA testing, it was confirmed that her name was Myung Hwa Cho and that she was Bobby's mom. Shortly after the identification, Bobby's father John Russell would confess that he took the lives of Bobby and Myung. He pleaded guilty on January 15, 2020, and was sentenced to 58 years in prison. It is not known why he did what he did. Alicia Stansell was born in March 1994 in Phoenix, Arizona. Her mom, Toni Stansell, had been having a difficult time after leaving the Air Force. One night in December 1994, Toni left Alicia with a friend of hers claiming that she needed a few days to clear her head. When Toni came back 2 days later, the baby was gone. She only reported Alicia as missing the next year in March of 1995. Investigators tried to find Alicia but were unable to. Tony's life was taken later in the year in what remains an unsolved case. In February 2008, cold case detectives developed a DNA profile for Alicia using genetic material from her living family members. Software was then used to create images to show what she might look like in the years since her disappearance. In 2014, a woman in Connecticut walked into hospital with no ID. A nurse started searching missing persons online. She discovered an age-progressed picture of the missing Alicia stencil, and it looked like the woman. A DNA test was then done, and it was confirmed that this woman was in fact the missing Alicia stencil. She had been adopted and raised under a different name. Besides that, we do not know much about her, and it seems like she wants it that way. Arliss DeCamau grew up in Bismarck, North Dakota. In August 1974, 19-year-old Arliss married Bruce Berry. The two of their men moved to the Stanford University campus where Bruce was a medical student. Arliss started to work as a receptionist at a local law firm. Just after 11 p.m. on the night of October 12, 1974, Arliss and Bruce had an argument. Arliss told her husband that she was going alone to the Stanford Memorial Church, and the two of them went their separate ways. When Arliss did not make it back home, Bruce got worried and reported her missing. Officers from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office went to the church but found all of the doors to be locked. The next morning, campus security guard Stephen Crawford found Arliss's body around 5:45 a.m. in a church. An ice pick was sticking out of the back of her head. She had been assaulted and strangled. Investigators looked into her husband and a security guard, but they passed the polygraph test and there were no concrete evidence had either of them committed the crime. In 2018, with more advanced DNA, investigators decided to do DNA testing on a DNA they found at a crime scene back in 1974 had belonged to the attacker. Investigators were then able to confirm that Stephen Crawford was the one who had ended Arliss's life. On June 28, 1938, the police arrived at his house to arrest him, but Stephen locked his door and ended his own life. Jessica Lynn Keene was born on September 24, 1975 in Columbus, Ohio. In 1990, 15-year-old Jessica was a model student. She had high grades and was a cheerleader. Her grades dropped and she quit cheerleading, however, when she met a boy and fell in love with him. On March 4, 1991, her parents went to a free counseling center in Columbus asking for help as they did not know what else to do with Jessica. The home for troubled teens offered residents for 2 weeks, individual and family counseling sessions. On March 15th, she left the home to go shopping. Jessica was last seen alive at a bus stop at around 6 p.m. When she did not make her way back to the home, the police were called. 2 days later, her body was found in a Foster Chapel cemetery about 20 miles from her home. She had been assaulted and hit with a blunt object. Evidence showed that she ran in a cemetery trying to get away from her attacker. The initial investigation focused on Jessica's boyfriend, Sean Thompson. He was ruled out as a suspect, however, as DNA evidence cleared him in this case. In February 2008, investigators finally got a break they were looking for. A man by the name of Marvin Lee Smith was arrested for a different case. When his DNA was taken, they found that his DNA matched the DNA found at the crime scene in Jessica's case. Marvin confessed to taking her life. He was sentenced to life in prison. 22-year-old Zachary Marshall lived in Bristol County, Massachusetts in 2010. He had a newborn daughter. Zachary worked at his uncle's auto body shop. At 2 a.m. on December 1830, Zachary and a friend of his were walking from a nightclub in Providence, Rhode Island. An argument broke out between Zachary and a group of men and a woman. During the argument, he was stabbed. Zachary passed away at a Rhode Island hospital. Every year, his family would raise money for a scholarship in his name and a fund for his daughter. They would talk to everyone in the area seeking information on the case. In February 2021, they would finally find the answers they were looking for. In February, Jason Lopez was arrested in Garland, Texas in connection of the case. He is currently being held without bail at a Dallas County jail in Texas and awaiting extradition back to Rhode Island. Detective Angelo Avant uncovered new evidence in the case that was brought to the Attorney General's office and led to the arrest. He did not want to specify what the evidence was. Attorney General Peter Noronha said, "The indictment in this case is a major step forward in our efforts to obtain justice for Mr. Marshall and his family. 10 years is a long time, and I recognize how difficult it has been for the family of Mr. Marshall to wait for this day to come. There is a distance on the road to justice still to travel, but I am pleased that we have reached this point." Zachary's mother, Diane Marshall, said that the news of the arrest brought a lot of emotion and pain. "We are extremely grateful to the Providence Police Department and all the hard work and tireless hours they have put into our son Zach's case. We are grateful for our family and the community support that we have received over the last 10 years. 21-year-old April Annette Dubois lived in Greenville County, South Carolina. She was married to David Randall Dubois. Their marriage was not a happy one, and they got legally separated. On February 19, 2001, Greenville County police officers were called to the apartment April had been living in Hudson Road, because she had not been seen in over a week. Inside of the apartment, April's body was found. Investigators determined that she passed away due to suspicious circumstances 9 days earlier. They believed that David took her life, and he was arrested in February 2006. There was, however, not enough evidence against him, and he was let go. A close friend of April, Brandy Jones, described April like this: "On the outside, she was sassy and spunky and the life of the party, always smiling. But when she was by herself, she was scared. She was broken." On March 18, 2021, 55-year-old David was arrested again in connection to the case. Lieutenant Ryan Flatt said, "This past year, the Sheriff Office New Cold Case Unit revisited the case and initiated their own investigation where they established probable cause using newly discovered evidence, which determined David the boy was responsible for taking the life of his then legally separated wife. David is currently held in a Greenville County detention center on no bond." Sheriff Hobart Lewis released this statement on the arrest. "While I cannot fathom for hardship that families face when they tragically lose a loved one and the case goes unsolved, I can express that our office is doing everything in our power to revisit each and every one of these cold cases in hopes of bringing eventual justice to these families. I am very proud of the work our investigators have been putting into these cold cases, and it is my hope to provide even a trace of closure to everyone who has been affected by these tragic circumstances." It has not yet been made public specifically what new evidence led to the arrest. 40-year-old Cara Enid Vaughn lived in Natchitoches, Louisiana in 1993. Her sister Lynn used to be the headline news anchor for CNN. In November, Cara left home in a white 1978 Honda Civic with less than $10 on her person. When she did not make it back home, her family got worried and they reported her missing. They told investigators they were worried because Cara often told them that she was going to drive a car into a river where she would not be found. Some of her friends believed that she may have moved to California. It seemed unlikely, however, as she only took the $10 with her. Cara was a diabetic and was not taking her medication. A search for her was conducted to no avail. In February 2007, dive teams searched Cairn River Lake after they learned that this was a river mentioned by Cara. Divers were unable to locate Cara or her vehicle, however. Then in March of 2021, fishermen called the police to tell them that they believe they found a car in a Cairn River Lake. On March 15th, divers found a Honda Civic. Inside was a woman's remains. They also found documents and an ID belonging to Cara. On March 24th, it was confirmed that the remains belonged to Cara Vaughn. Her family has been notified of the discovery. This is not the news they would have liked to hear, as they always had hope that she was still alive. The news also sadly came too late, as Cara's parents passed away and never learned what happened to their daughter. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.